Welcome to Somnistry Stories. Outside, the rain falls in steady rhythms, tapping against the attic skylight. Inside, the warm glow of a lamp and the soft ticking of clocks fill the air. A patient clockmaker works, unhurried, surrounded by time itself. Settle in and let the evening unfold. The rain fell in a gentle, unwavering rhythm upon the attic skylight, each droplet joining the soft symphony that had persisted since early afternoon. Inside the workshop, sheltered from the cool evening air, Hugo adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses and leaned closer to the open pocket watch, laid carefully on his workbench. The green-shaded lamp cast a warm pool of light over his weathered hands, illuminating the tiny constellation of brass gears and silver springs arranged in a neat semicircle. "Tick-tock," he whispered to the watch, his voice barely audible above the patter of raindrops. "You'll be keeping perfect time again soon." The workshop embraced him in its familiar comfort. A cramped attic space with sloped ceilings where dozens of clocks marked the seconds in overlapping rhythms. Some fast, some slow, some precise, some still waiting for Hugo's patient touch to awaken them again. The rust-red enamel stove in the corner radiated a steady warmth, its gentle crackling adding another layer to the room's peaceful soundscape. Hugo reached for a tiny screwdriver, the second smallest from the left, on his meticulously organized tool rack, and returned to the pocket watch. His movements were unhurried, deliberate. There was no rush here, no urgency. Only the steady passage of time marked by rain and ticking clocks. A particularly large raindrop landed on the skylight directly above his workbench. Hugo's eyes drifted upward, following as the droplet hesitated for a moment on the glass, gathering its weight before beginning its journey downward. It moved slowly at first, tracing an invisible path that only it could determine. The droplet paused at the crack, a diagonal imperfection in the top right pane that Hugo had never bothered to repair. He knew each millimeter of that crack by heart, had watched thousands of raindrops navigate its jagged terrain over the years. This particular droplet lingered at the widest part of the crack, swelling as it collected smaller beads of moisture before continuing its meandering path downward. Hugo's eyes followed its journey with quiet fascination. The droplet split into two smaller rivulets at a nearly invisible imperfection in the glass, one racing ahead, the other falling behind. They moved in parallel for a moment before the leading droplet veered right, picking up speed as it joined another stream of moisture flowing toward the edge of the pane. The second droplet moved more slowly, creating a glistening trail that caught the warm light from Hugo's lamp, transforming into a momentary streak of amber against the darkening evening sky beyond. 3 more droplets followed the same path, each one slightly different, each one equally mesmerizing in its silent descent. Hugo's fingers paused their work. The tiny screwdriver held motionless above the pocket watch, as he watched this miniature water ballet perform against the backdrop of steady rainfall. The rhythmic tapping of droplets against glass merged with the ticking of clocks into a single soothing melody that filled the workshop. After a moment, he returned his attention to the pocket watch, adjusting a minuscule gear with practiced precision. When he was satisfied with its placement, he set down the screwdriver and reached into his apron pocket, retrieving a small, dented tin box. The tin had once been brightly painted, but years of being carried in Hugo's pocket had worn away most of the design, leaving only hints of what might have been flowers, or perhaps a landscape scene. Hugo ran his thumb over the smooth, worn surface before carefully prying open the lid. The sharp, clean scent of peppermint immediately brightened the air around him, cutting through the workshop's usual blend of clock oil, brass, and the faint mustiness of the attic space. Hugo inhaled deeply, allowing the refreshing aroma to fill his lungs. The mint carried with it a crisp clarity, like the first breath on a winter morning, invigorating yet somehow calming in its purity. He selected a single white peppermint from the tin, noting how it contrasted against the dark stains on his fingertips, evidence of years working with oils and polishes. Placing the mint on his tongue, Hugo closed the tin with a soft click and returned it to his pocket. The peppermint dissolved slowly, releasing its cool sweetness gradually as he resumed his work. The flavour of mint mingled with the sounds and sights of the workshop. The gentle percussion of rain, the overlapping whispers of clock mechanisms, the warm glow of the lamp, and the ever-present heat radiating from the stove. Each sense connected to the next in a harmonious tapestry of sensations that had defined Hugo's evenings for decades. Above him, more raindrops began their leisurely journeys down the skylight. One particularly large droplet caught Hugo's eye as it navigated the entire length of the glass, absorbing smaller drops along the way until it gathered enough weight to create a soft, rounded reflection of the lamp below. The droplet carried the warm light within itself for a brief moment, before disappearing from view at the edge of the pane. Hugo polished his glasses with a chamois cloth he kept in his breast pocket, the first of his twice-hourly rituals. He did this without thinking, an action so deeply ingrained that his hands moved of their own accord. The soft fabric glided over the round lenses in circular motions, removing the faint fog that had begun to form from the steam of the copper kettle resting atop the stove. Replacing his glasses, the world came back into focus with renewed clarity. The peppermint's aroma seemed sharper now, more defined against the background of rain-washed air seeping through the old attic's inevitable cracks and seams. Hugo could detect the subtle layers within the scent. The bright, almost citrus-like top notes, giving way to the deeper, more soothing aspects of the herb. He returned to the pocket watch, lifting it gently to examine the movement from another angle. The balance wheel oscillated smoothly now, each swing precise and even. Hugo nodded in quiet approval. Tick-tock, he whispered again, the peppermint sweetening his breath. Finding your rhythm again, aren't you? The pocket watch now rested on a small velvet cushion Hugo kept specifically for timepieces nearing completion. Its case was open, revealing the newly aligned mechanism within, a microcosm of order amid the gentle chaos of the workshop. Hugo allowed himself a moment to simply listen to its rhythm, comparing it to the steady metronome that stood at the corner of his workbench. Outside, the rain continued its patient conversation with the skylight. The evening had deepened, turning the glass into a dark mirror that reflected the workshop in fragments, broken by the steady streams of water. Each raindrop followed its predetermined path, yet no two journeys were ever quite the same. Some droplets travelled quickly, racing down in smooth, uninterrupted lines. Others meandered, pausing at invisible imperfections in the glass, gathering volume before continuing their descent. Hugo reached for the copper kettle, which had been releasing gentle wisps of steam into the workshop air. He poured the hot water into a waiting teacup, simple white porcelain with a hairline crack along the rim. The water darkened as it met the tea leaves, releasing a subtle aroma of chamomile that mingled with the lingering scent of peppermint. Unlike the sharp brightness of the mint, the chamomile brought a softer, more rounded fragrance to the workshop, honey-sweet and reminiscent of sun-warmed hayfields. He set the cup at the far edge of the workbench, allowing it to steep, while he turned his attention to a carriage clock that had been waiting patiently for several days. Its brass case gleamed in the warm lamplight, recently polished but still awaiting Hugo's attention to its inner workings. With careful hands, he removed the back panel, revealing the mechanism inside. Unlike the pocket watch with its circular arrangement, the carriage clock's gears formed neat, parallel rows. A different kind of precision, a different kind of beauty. Hugo studied it for a long moment, taking in the current state of each component before deciding where to begin. "You've been keeping secrets," he murmured to the clock, his voice a soft counterpoint to the rain. "Let's see what's troubling you." Hugo selected a different tool now, a slender brass pick with a hooked end, perfect for lifting the tiniest springs without damaging them. He held it up to the light, examining its point before bringing it to the clock's mechanism. With a patience born from decades of practice, he probed gently at a small gear that had shifted slightly out of alignment. The rain's pattern changed subtly, growing softer as the wind outside eased. The droplets no longer raced, but drifted lazily down the skylight, creating elaborate, interconnected patterns that spread across the glass like delicate lace. Hugo glanced up, noticing how the reduced tempo of rainfall altered the entire atmosphere of the workshop. The clocks seemed to tick more prominently now, their overlapping rhythms more distinct against the gentler backdrop of rain. A drop formed at the exact point where the crack in the skylight began. It hung there, suspended, gathering weight and volume until it became perfectly round. A liquid lens that captured the entire workshop in miniature within its curved surface. Hugo watched as it finally surrendered to gravity, sliding down the length of the crack with surprising slowness, as if reluctant to complete its journey. The tea had steeped to a perfect amber colour, and Hugo reached for the cup with his left hand, while his right continued to work with the brass pick. The warmth of the porcelain spread through his fingers, a pleasant contrast to the cool metal tools he had been handling. He brought the cup to his lips and took a small sip, allowing the gentle flavour to spread across his tongue. Unlike the bright clarity of peppermint, the chamomile tea offered a different kind of comfort. Mellow, warming, with subtle floral notes that complemented the peaceful atmosphere of the evening. Setting down his tea, Hugo returned his full attention to the carriage clock. The problem was becoming clear now. A pivot had worn slightly, causing the gear train to bind intermittently. It was a common issue with clocks of this age, one that required patience rather than force to correct. From a small drawer beneath his workbench, Hugo retrieved a slender file, its surface worn smooth from years of use. With precise movements, he began to reshape the pivot, removing the smallest amount of material with each careful stroke. Metal dust gathered on the dark cloth he had placed beneath the clock, tiny brass particles catching the lamplight like diminutive stars. The rain found a new rhythm, settling into a steady, moderate pace that would likely continue through the night. Hugo had learned to read the subtle language of rainfall over the years, could distinguish between a passing shower and the kind of patient, thorough rain that would linger until morning. Tonight was the latter, a gentle, persistent companion that would accompany his work for hours to come. As he filed, Hugo noticed how the lamplight created soft shadows that danced across the walls with each movement of his hands. These shadows stretched and contracted, overlapping with the silhouettes cast by the dozens of clocks surrounding him. The effect was a gentle animation that played across the workshop. Nothing abrupt or jarring, just a slow, continuous shifting of light and dark that matched the deliberate pace of his work. The carriage clock began to respond to his adjustments, its tick growing more even, more assured. Hugo paused to listen, counting 12 beats before nodding with quiet satisfaction. He set down the file and reached for a tiny brass oil cup, no larger than his thumbnail. A single drop of oil, pale amber and viscous, clung to the applicator as he brought it to the newly adjusted pivot. The oil spread smoothly around the metal, creating a perfect interface between the moving parts. Hugo watched as it distributed itself evenly, drawn into the mechanism by capillary action. There was something deeply satisfying about this moment in a clock's repair, when the proper lubrication transformed stuttering motion into fluid movement. The gears now turned with renewed purpose, each tooth engaging the next in a continuous transfer of energy and time. The chamomile tea had cooled to the perfect drinking temperature, and Hugo took another sip, letting the warmth travel down his throat and spread through his chest. Outside, the pattern of raindrops had shifted again, creating parallel rivulets that trace straight lines down the skylight. 7 streams now flowed in perfect unison, like musicians following the same silent conductor. Hugo set down his tea and gently placed 3 fingertips on the workbench, feeling the minute vibrations of all the clocks at work around him. Through the solid oak surface, he could sense their collective rhythm. Dozens of timepieces marking seconds in their own unique voices, yet somehow harmonizing into a single, unified presence. It was not simply a sound, but a physical sensation. A gentle pulse that had become as familiar to him as his own heartbeat. The third plank from the stove, the one that always creaked, was carefully avoided as Hugo shifted his position slightly, reaching for a small brush with soft bristles. He used this to clear away the remaining brass particles from around the carriage clock's mechanism, each stroke methodical and thorough. The bristles made a gentle whispering sound against the metal, adding another subtle layer to the workshop's soundscape. The carriage clock now sat proudly among its fellows, its steady rhythm a testament to Hugo's care. He turned his attention to a wall-mounted regulator clock, a handsome piece with a mahogany case and a gleaming brass pendulum. Unlike the intimate work of pocket watches or the precise engineering of carriage clocks, regulator clocks spoke with authority, their larger mechanisms designed for a singular purpose: accuracy above all else. Hugo rose from his stool, his joints settling into a more vertical alignment, with the deliberate ease of someone who knows his body's quiet language. He moved across the workshop, his footfalls nearly silent on the faded paisley rug. Years of practice had taught him exactly where to place each step to avoid disturbing the delicate equilibrium of the workshop sounds. The regulator clock waited at eye level, its glass door reflecting Hugo's approach. He opened it with reverence, the hinges moving without sound. He had oiled them himself just last week. Inside, the pendulum hung motionless, waiting for his touch to begin its measured swing once more. Hugo removed the pendulum with both hands, cradling the brass bob with the same care one might hold a sleeping bird. He carried it to his workbench and placed it on a folded length of green baize cloth. The metal had acquired a slight tarnish along one side, barely perceptible to anyone but Hugo, who noted such details as naturally as others might observe changes in weather. From a drawer beneath his workbench, he retrieved a small jar of brass polish and a selection of soft cloths. The polish had a distinctive scent, sharper than the peppermint, but less astringent, with undertones of linseed oil and fine clay. Hugo unscrewed the lid and set it aside, then dipped the corner of a cloth into the creamy substance. With circular motions, he began to polish the pendulum bob. his pressure perfectly calibrated to remove the tarnish without altering the weight of the brass. The rain continued its gentle percussion on the skylight, now forming a continuous shimmering curtain rather than individual droplets. The water flowed in sheets down the glass, transforming the view into a fluid, abstract painting of darkness and light. As he worked, Hugo noticed how the motion of his hands matched the flow of the rainwater. Circular, continuous, unhurried. There was a harmony in these parallel movements, as if he and the rain were performing complementary parts in the same quiet symphony. The brass began to respond to his ministrations, the tarnish giving way to reveal the warm golden glow beneath. The scent of the polish mingled with the lingering aromas of peppermint and chamomile, creating a layered olfactory experience that shifted subtly with each breath. Hugo found himself focusing on these changing scents, first detecting the bright note of mint, then the mellow sweetness of chamomile, followed by the earthy complexity of the brass polish. Each inhalation brought a slightly different combination, yet all were familiar. All were part of the workshop's comforting vocabulary of smells. When the pendulum bob gleamed to his satisfaction, Hugo set aside the polishing cloth and examined his work. The brass now caught the lamplight and reflected it back with a warm golden hue. He lifted the pendulum, feeling its perfect weight, and carried it back to the regulator clock. With practiced hands, he reattached it to the suspension spring, making minute adjustments to ensure it hung precisely vertical. Hugo stepped back, watching as the pendulum remained still, balanced at the exact center of its potential arc. He reached out with one finger and with the lightest possible touch, set it in motion. The pendulum began its journey, swinging with stately grace. Left, right, left, right, each arc precisely the same as the last. The sound of the escapement engaging filled the workshop with its rhythmic tick-tock, tick-tock. Unlike the rapid heartbeat of smaller timepieces, the regulator clock spoke with measured authority, marking seconds with deliberate clarity. Hugo stood before it, his hands clasped lightly behind his back, counting 30 complete cycles before nodding with quiet approval. Rain cascaded down the skylight in ever-changing patterns, sometimes forming intricate whirls where the water gathered around invisible imperfections in the glass, other times flowing in smooth ribbons that reflected the warm light from below. Hugo watched this liquid dance for several moments, appreciating how no two rainfalls were ever quite the same, just as no two clocks kept time in precisely the same way. The evening had deepened considerably, and though Hugo couldn't see the sky through the rain-washed skylight, he knew the stars would be hidden behind the clouds that brought this gentle storm. The world outside had grown quiet. No distant church bells, no passing carts, no voices calling across the street. Only the rain remained, wrapping the workshop in a cocoon of soothing sound. Hugo returned to his workbench and selected yet another timepiece from his collection of clocks awaiting attention. This one was different. A small astronomical clock with a moon phase dial, designed to track not just hours and minutes, but the waxing and waning of the moon across its monthly journey. The face was painted with a night sky of deep blue enamel, with tiny gold stars positioned to form accurate constellations. He opened the back panel to reveal a mechanism more complex than those of standard timepieces. Where a simple clock might have dozens of parts, this one contained over 100 additional gears and cams specifically designed to rotate the moon dial at precisely the right speed to match the lunar cycle. Hugo drew the green-shaded lamp closer, adjusting its position to cast light at the optimal angle. The mechanism gleamed beneath the warm illumination, each component a testament to human ingenuity and precision. He studied the clockwork carefully, noting how the various systems interconnected. The timekeeping train linked to the date mechanism, which in turn drove the moon phase indicator. From a small wooden box lined with red velvet, Hugo selected a set of specialized tools designed specifically for working with astronomical clocks. These were among his finest instruments. Slender brass implements with ivory handles, each one shaped for a particular purpose. He laid them out in a neat row on his workbench, arranging them in the order he anticipated needing them. The rain's rhythm shifted again, growing softer as the wind outside diminished further. Now it fell straight down, creating a more uniform pattern on the skylight, like a beaded curtain swaying gently in an unfelt breeze. The sound became more hushed, more intimate, as if the rain were sharing a secret with the workshop. Hugo began the delicate process of dismantling the astronomical clock, removing each component with meticulous care and placing it on a clean white cloth in a precise arrangement that mirrored its position in the mechanism. This method ensured that when the time came to reassemble the clock, each piece would return to its proper place. As he worked, the workshop settled deeper into its evening rhythm. The stove's crackling had subsided to a gentle murmur as the fire burned down to glowing embers. The various clocks continued their overlapping conversations, each voice distinct yet part of the greater whole. And through it all, the rain maintained its gentle presence, sometimes nearly silent, sometimes rising to a soft patter, but always there, a constant companion to Hugo's work. He discovered the issue with the astronomical clock quickly enough. A tiny pivot that had worn slightly oval instead of remaining perfectly round. This subtle imperfection caused the moon phase dial to advance irregularly, making it less accurate over time. It was the kind of problem that most people would never notice. But to Hugo, such small deviations from perfection were as obvious as bold ink on blank paper. From a small envelope, Hugo tipped a selection of replacement pivots onto his workbench. Each was slightly different in diameter, and he measured the worn pivot carefully with a micrometer before selecting its replacement. The chosen pivot was a perfect match. Exactly the right diameter to fit the bearing, while allowing the proper clearance for a thin film of oil. Using a set of brass-tipped tweezers, Hugo positioned the new pivot alongside the mechanism, preparing for the delicate procedure of removing the worn part and installing its replacement. This would require his complete attention, a calm hand, and the patience that had become second nature over his decades of working with timepieces. The copper kettle on the stove had ceased its steaming, the water inside having cooled to room temperature. The workshop had taken on the quality of a still life painting. Various objects arranged in harmonious relationship, illuminated by the warm glow of the lamp, shadows soft and edges gentle. Only the continuous movement of clockwork and the ever-changing patterns of raindrops prevented the scene from becoming truly static. Hugo adjusted his glasses, taking a moment to observe how the lamplight caught the edge of the lens, creating a brief rainbow effect visible only from his angle. These small, fleeting moments of beauty were frequent companions in his work, little gifts that appeared unexpectedly and disappeared just as quickly, appreciated but never grasped. With the new pivot in place, Hugo reassembled the astronomical clock with the same care he had used in taking it apart. Each gear returned to its proper position, each spring to its designated tension. The wheel that drove the moon phase dial now turned with the appropriate resistance. Not too loose, not too tight. When complete, the mechanism hummed with contentment, all its parts working in perfect harmony. The blue enamel face with its gold stars seemed to come alive as Hugo wound the clock. The moon phase dial, a small disc painted half silver, half blue, began its slow rotation behind an aperture in the clock face, showing the current phase of the moon. Hugo adjusted it to match tonight's moon. Though invisible behind rain clouds, he knew it was approaching its first quarter. The evening had progressed toward its natural conclusion, the workshop settling into a deeper tranquility as the hour approached 9. Hugo surveyed his completed work with quiet satisfaction. The pocket watch, carriage clock, regulator, and astronomical clock, all keeping their own perfect time, yet somehow in harmony with one another. He moved through the workshop with unhurried steps, visiting each clock in turn, listening to their individual voices. Some spoke in bright, clear tones, while others murmured in deeper registers. Together, they created a gentle chorus that had accompanied his life for decades, a sound as familiar as breathing. The rain had found its nighttime rhythm, steady and soft against the skylight, no longer racing or forming patterns. It had settled into a consistent presence, a transparent curtain separating the workshop from the world outside. The water flowed in an unbroken sheet down the glass, transforming the view into a glistening tapestry of refracted light. Hugo paused beside the wall clock nearest his workbench, watching as its minuted hand approached the vertical position. In moments, it would be 9 o'clock, and as if responding to an unheard signal, he began to prepare the workshop for night. He lowered the wick of the green-shaded lamp slightly, reducing its brightness to a warm amber glow that spread in a smaller circle across the workbench. The shadows in the corners of the room deepened, not in a threatening way, but like a soft blanket being drawn over the edges of the space. The copper kettle received a fresh measure of water from a pitcher kept nearby, ensuring it would provide gentle humidity through the night. Hugo placed it carefully on the stove, positioned so that it would warm but not boil, just enough to release occasional wisps of steam into the dry winter air. With a long brass key, he opened the small door of the stove and added 2 logs from the stack kept beside it. The wood settled onto the bed of embers with a soft rustle, little flames appearing around their edges, licking tentatively at the fresh fuel. The fire would burn slowly for hours, maintaining the workshop's comfortable warmth through the night. The logs shifted slightly as they caught, releasing the faint scent of birch into the air, a clean, subtle fragrance that complemented the workshop's existing blend of aromas. Hugo closed the stove door, the latch making a gentle click as it engaged. Outside, the church bells began to chime the hour, their sound muffled by distance and rain, yet still audible through the workshop's old walls. Hugo stood still, counting each toll with an unconscious nod. 1, 2, 3, continuing until all 9 had sounded. As if responding to this signal, the clocks in the workshop began their own 9 o'clock performance. First came the wall clock with its clear, resonant bell. Then the carriage clock joined with its lighter tone. The grandfather clock in the corner added its dignified voice, and one by one, each timepiece capable of marking the hour contributed to the overlapping melody of chimes. Hugo listened, hands resting lightly at his sides, as the brief symphony filled the workshop. Each clock finished in its own time, the sounds gradually fading until only the familiar ticking remained, accompanied by the gentle patter of rain and the soft crackling of fresh logs in the stove. He moved to his chair, not the moth-eaten armchair with the tartan blanket, which was reserved for guests who rarely came, but his own simple wooden seat with a cushion worn to the perfect contour of his form. He settled into it with a comfortable sigh, removing his glasses and placing them on the small table beside him. The workshop appeared slightly softened without his glasses, the edges of objects less defined. The light from the lamp diffused into a warm halo. Hugo found this change pleasant, a natural transition from the precise work of the day to the restful atmosphere of evening. He did not need to watch the clocks to know they were keeping perfect time. He did not need to observe the rain to know it would continue its gentle rhythm through the night. These constants were as much a part of him as breathing, reliable, comforting, eternal in their impermanence. The fire settled in the stove, the new logs now fully embraced by flame, ensuring hours of steady warmth. The rain continued its patient conversation with the skylight. The clocks marked each second with their overlapping voices. And through it all, the workshop held these sounds in a perfect balance, a sanctuary of order and peace amid the wild, wet night. Hugo closed his eyes, not to sleep, but to listen more completely. Each tick, each raindrop, each soft pop from the stove became more distinct, more present. The world contracted to this moment, this space, these sounds. Nothing more was needed. The clocks hummed in unison, their chorus blending with the rain's endless song, and the workshop sighed into the night, content to continue its quiet existence as Hugo rested, surrounded by time itself.